Piton ug iyang asawang bulanon
magtiayon sa lalawigan sa Bohol.
Ng isang dayuhan at ang kanyang asawang Pilipina.
7 taon ng mag-asawa sina Terence at Beth na nakatira ngayon sa lungsod ng Talibon, Bohol. Suportado ni Congresswoman Alexi Totor ang programang pabahay ng mag-asawang Martin sa probinsya ng Bohol dahil sa inisyatibong tumulong sa mga Boholano.
Don't forget to share.
Hey, welcome to A Foreigner in the Philippines, and well, I thought I'd go back and do one of my meanderings, and so you're in for it. You never did me any harm, but I'm still gonna do it, okay? Anyway, I was just looking at some of the great books that I've read, and books that had a huge impact on me. Books which came recommended by other people. I went through a period where I used to ask people, what's your favourite book? And then I would go to the library and I'd get that book, and that led me to reading a huge number of books. And then once a guy gave me a book which was like, they have a name for it, but it's where a lot of authors are all put together in one book. And I read something like 80 to 100 books, short stories that were short stories by some of the most famous authors in the world, all over the world, from Russia, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, John Steinbeck. I couldn't be further apart. And I read all of their short stories that were in that book, 80 to 100. And I used to ask people, as I say, for their stories. And boy, when people give you the favourite story that they have, then it's usually going to be a great story. I'd often heard of Mark Twain, and I knew that he was an American author, but somebody told me once, you should read his book about his life as a pilot on the Mississippi. That was one of the most entertaining books that I ever read. But one of the another book that comes to mind is a book which you may not have heard of. Everybody's heard, I think, of probably the most famous motivational book that's ever been written, and that is Think and Grow Rich. Not what you would think about growing rich. It wasn't so much about money. It was about an inner peace. It was about finding yourself. It was about becoming fulfilled. It was about finding God. It was about all kinds of things that were not just related to money. And there are many, I've seen it said that there are many motivational speakers that go back and read that book at least once a year. Now, for famous comedians, one of the books that they say, the best book that was ever written, was Catch-22. That was Joseph Heller. As far as I know, Joseph Heller only wrote, that I knew about, my ignorant self, he only wrote Catch-22, which had a very difficult start. It was written and rewritten again, and a lot of people really tried to get that book out, and then it became an iconic bestseller. It became a cult book. It became a movie, although as in many cases the movie was so far behind the book. But one of the books that I read, which I really found the most exciting and interesting, was about success and failure, and how to get there, and what's involved in people's minds about being successful, and about how they're going to do it. And that was a book with a strange title called Psycho-cybernetics. And Psycho-cybernetics was a really excellent book. It was written by a plastic surgeon who did a great deal of incredible work putting together soldiers who had been injured at war and had suffered terrible facial injuries, and he did some early pioneering work in reconstructive surgery. And one of the things that he observed was, obviously because he worked for money too, on the side, and as a way of giving back, he helped soldiers that had been injured at war. But one of the things that he did, obviously he did all of the usual things, that nose jobs and the boob jobs and all of that. But he said that he noticed that if the person didn't make the adjustment in their mind about how they now looked after they'd had, say, a nose job, then it didn't work. He could give them a perfectly straight nose, which is what they'd asked for, and yet they wouldn't be able to accept their look. And one in particular, he said, was, I think, a Greek lady, and she was from that kind of a racial background, which had more of a scimitar nose, you know, slightly hooked nose, even for a woman. He changed that and made it a small, petite, sought after type of stereotypical nose for a beautiful woman. She couldn't accept it, and he had to put it back the way that it was, because that's where she felt that her identity was. So it made him do psychological research at the same as doing research on his own particular reconstructive surgery. And he developed the idea of psycho-cybernetics. And psycho-cybernetics was this way of working out what the kind of machinery was that was involved in making decisions, changing your life. It's a very common phrase nowadays that we are responsible for our own reality and our own futures. Like today, today we're living the life that we planned for ourselves yesterday. That's an oversimplification, but it is in essence what is the truth, is that the way that you have thought in the past has shaped the way that you are right now. I remember reading this, and in the book, it was a doctor, of course, and he had said that if you want to know what you deserve, most people have an idea, at least they verbalize an idea about what they deserve in life, you know. It's a very common phrase, isn't it? Well, he deserved better than that, or she got what she deserved. So this is a popular expression which describes a condition of getting something that in your perception you actually deserve. And the point that I read and that I tried to share with a friend was, I asked him the question, what do you think you deserve? And he said, well, I think I deserve I'm a good carpenter, I deserve to have good work and be paid well for it, and have a nice place to live and a nice truck to drive. And I then tried to make the point with him, but it was too close to home, and I had to turn the thing back on myself to say, what you actually deserve is what you have. And what you have is not enough work and not getting paid enough, and you have a truck that keeps breaking down, and you're living on more or less a building site. Well, of course, that was too harsh a reality for him to accept. But when I put it on myself, he understood it. And I said, if I think from the top of the head rather than from the heart, I believe that I am capable of doing good work, good creative work. I should be able to do artistic, creative work and be well paid for it, have a good relationship with someone who loves me, and a nice place to live and a nice car to drive, and fulfillment. And I think I deserve that. But that's almost like in an intellectual way, where you're thinking from the top of the head and not from an inner soul type of place. And of course, what I deserved at that time was what I had, and that was that I was struggling. I didn't have the work that I really wanted to do, and I was still hoping to meet that relationship which would give me happiness and fulfillment. And it had really come home to me that what you have is actually what you, in your heart of hearts, think you deserve. So if you want to find out what internal work you need to do, you look at what you've got and try to work out how far it is away from what you really think, at least intellectually, that you deserve. And if it's lacking, then you need to look and do your inner work on your inner self before you can find out how you can have the life that you would like to think you deserve. In Psycho-cybernetics, it puts forward the most important thing that I took away from that book was the idea that you must make mistakes. And every time that you go to do something, you should be making, and if you're not making mistakes, you're really not trying hard enough. Some of the motivational speakers have that saying, instead of saying aim, what is it? Aim, ready, aim, fire. And what they're saying is ready, fire, aim. And that's the way that it should be. Because otherwise, you will never ever be ready to take the shot. So here's one of the best ways to describe what the mechanism is on aiming for something and being willing to make a mistake. And it certainly guided me through most of the better successes of my life, such as they were. And what you do is you think about the aircraft. When you go on an aircraft, you think that the pilot, you probably think like I did for a long time, that the pilot gets in and he drives the plane like you and I would drive a car. Now, when I drive a car, if I'm not in control of the car and guiding that car, it doesn't get where it's supposed to go. It's not the case with an airline pilot. What an airline pilot does is he will be in voluntary control while he's taking off, and he will take off and he will set the pattern, and then he will set course, a little bit like, say, like a ship. A ship sets course. Now, it doesn't go in circles. What it does is the plane goes in a straight line until the autopilot recognizes that it's no longer heading towards the place that it wants to go. So it's really doing something like this. It's going in a straight line, and then it realizes that instead of the destination being here, the destination is actually over here. So now it realizes it's made a mistake and it points again. So all the time it's going in a series of straight lines until it realizes that it's now mistaken, and then it changes course. And that's the key, is that you set out, you say yes to a job, and then find out how to do it. Now that does sound almost like it's well, it wouldn't be honest to take on a job that you couldn't find. that you couldn't do. But if it was something that you could learn while you were doing that and still find from your inner resources how to do the job, then it would be right. I remember that I did a job when I was in California. I was asked to do a job that was described to me as being very simple, and it didn't turn out to be so simple. But I did a job for a famous comedian, and the job was that he was having this house built, and his living room had this, it had a ceiling as if it was like a breaking wave. The ceiling went like this, and he wanted to have stars. So the company that I was doing some work for they did fiber optics. Now, fiber optics is one where you can have the source of light in a room that's away from the display, and where the fiber optic is, the end of the fiber optic, the light is shone into the fiber optic, and then whatever the course of that fiber optic, no matter where it goes, not backwards and forwards, but if it goes over, it then comes out and pokes through the ceiling like this, and then you snip off the end, and the source of light is transferred to the end of that fiber optic. And there were several thousand fiber optics into the ceiling, and that was part of the job of running the fiber optics through the ceiling. It was made easy because the roof was not yet on. In California, fairly safe thing, because they know when the rain is going to come. So there was a period where there was no roof on, and we clambered over the roof onto the joists, and we were looking at the back of the ceiling. So then we have a map, we drilled a hole for every optic to go up into the ceiling, and then from the other side there would be a fiber optic come through. How did you know where the fiber optic was coming? You would have it so that when you drilled the hole, according to the map that was written, that was drawn on the ceiling, you would drill a hole, then you would poke a short piece of fiber optic into that hole, and then the technician from the other side who is coming along, and all he has to do is to find the little short piece, pull it through, and put the fiber optic that was connected to the light source into that hole. He would poke it through, and it would come through quite a lot. Then in the finishing touches it would be snipped off at a right angle, and that's how they would do it. Well, what they wanted was to have a night sky like you would see in the desert. In the desert there is no light pollution because there's no sources of light. We rarely get to see a sky that is not polluted by light, because we're always near a source of light on the ground. Especially if you live near a big city, then all of that light is being reflected into the sky and clouds and all of that. But out in the desert, with no sources of light, the sky is pitch black and the stars are bright. So that's the effect that they were looking for. And my instructions as an artist was to airbrush cloud formations as seen in the Milky Way. If you look up where there is no pollution of light, you can actually see the Milky Way, which is this swath of so many stars and pinpoints of light that they join together into the Milky Way. And so what I was supposed to do was to give different formations of stars as you would expect to see in in depending on what kind of formation it was, doing circles like this and just various different shapes, and then a swath of the general background of light, little pinpoints of light. And what I had to find out in order to do that, I accepted the job, and then when I got there, because there had been so much problems with this particular artist having his house done, they'd been working late at night, and they'd had radios going, as workers will, and it was a nightmare for the surrounding neighbours. So they'd taken him to court, and they'd had a court order against him that no workers were allowed at night. So when I went in, I was supposed to do my night scene at night. We later realized how we could do this, but at first it was that I was going to do, and in the dark I would be able to do my ceiling and my light, my star formations. Well, when we started, and I started my little compressor with my airbrush, it was too loud. And at that point, anyway, I realized that it was not as easy as it had been put over to me to do these star formations. But by being there and finding inner resources in myself, and from the experience that I had in painting and so on, I took it was actually a piece that was taken from a builder's shim, and it was down into almost like a drumstick. So the end of it was very, very small, more like a chopstick, and I dipped that into the fluorescent paint and I tapped it onto the ceiling, and it was perfect. So from then on a 900 square foot ceiling, I tapped a sky at night. And when the artist saw it, he actually was delighted and said, "This is like a night sky in the desert." There's a place called Death Valley, I believe, that's outside of California, but it just was perfect. Now the way that you picked up that fluorescent light was by having black light, fluorescent black light, and that would pick out the painting. And before you put that light on, the painting that I had done was invisible. It didn't respond and show itself to ambient light. So in order to bring you back to the psycho-cybernetics and the idea that you go ahead until you realize that you're not on the right track, and then you change. What I did was I went ahead until I saw, using that technique, that piece of information, that piece of data, I used that, and I tapped it. I said, well, what would happen if I just dipped this in the pen and then just tapped it like that, and it would put a tiny little speck of the paint onto the ceiling. Of course, I was working under black light then, so I saw exactly what had happened. So I found out that it wasn't going to work with the airbrush and the compressor, and then I changed and went to manual, and then by looking I was able to do the job. And so we can do that with everything that we are trying to achieve. You can find out something about how you should go about doing something and be willing to make a mistake. A lot of people are very critical of those who make a mistake and fail. There's nothing wrong in failing. If you, the success stories that you hear about that are most famous are full of failures. Edison made thousands of light bulbs before he got the one that would work. Colonel Sanders, he went and offered his recipe, his secret recipe, to thousands of restaurant owners before he found someone who was willing to take a chance on him. And once that happened, then they were able to go ahead, market what he had done, do the marketing, and now it costs you a great deal of money to be able to buy that franchise in order to do it. The same with, what was his name, Kroc, who did the McDonald's. He bought that and he made all of the burgers the same. All of everything, he called it a Mac this or a Mac that. So now you go in and you I don't know, you have Mac everything, don't you? And he did that so that no matter where you were, you could go into a McDonald's. I've been into a McDonald's in China, in Shenzhen, and been able to order the same Big Mac as I was able to order in Los Angeles or in San Fernando Valley. See, so that was his idea. I wonder how easily he would have been able to sell that idea, because it would sound so ridiculous. But if you're willing to make a mistake and then correct the mistake, you might want to go back and look at that book, which is Psycho-cybernetics, and it is actually a famous book for the kind of person who is seeking to have that kind of information, and that's probably more information that you need. And I thank you for being with me and for listening and giving me your attention on this late night meandering. It's quite late. Let me see, I think it's about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. Everybody's gone to bed, everything's quiet, and it's just me. I made myself a drink, and here I am. So, bye for now.